Hey, it's your host, Marie Moss here. Thank you for listening to this podcast. And I am not saying that out of habit, but I've started and stopped this little episode, if you even want to call it that, a bunch of times already. I feel like it's the first episode that I ever recorded where I'm trying to find the right words. So I'm overthinking and I'm zigzagging with all of my thoughts and I don't want to waste your time. So I'm all over the place, but it just makes me think back to the beginning. And whether this is your third episode in or you have been here from the beginning almost 2 years ago, thank you for being here, because I feel like I have been kind of all over the place in the last couple of years. When this thing started, it was all about documenting and documentary photography, and I've had some pivots in this thing. We've been talking for the last year, and especially in the last few months, aside from some random episodes here and there, we have been talking about how documenting actually fits into this bigger picture that I kind of became awake to within, as this podcast has grown, I have been growing. So I feel like if you have stuck with me this far, like that's really freaking cool, because I feel like I'm like that person who's all over the place and you've really got to try to keep up. I don't know how you feel, but that's how I feel. I feel like I've been all over the place. So yes, that's a wrap on intentional documentary. I'm like closing the lid on that thing. We are putting it in our keepsake box and we're moving forward into, I don't want to say a new conversation, but definitely a new season. So I think that the name intentional documentary kind of is limiting, because I've wanted to have guests on here that are more in the business world and not into documenting. And I think that they see the name and they think, oh, well, that's not my audience. They're just a bunch of, photographers and memory keepers and all of that. But we're about so much more, So I've been thinking about it, and I want to change the name of this podcast to Dangerously Good Stories. So that's one thing. So the other side is that I've been struggling to keep up with the weekly pace of this podcast. So we're going to take a break for a little bit. So when I do come back, and this is called Dangerously Good Stories, it's all going to be the same. It's not going to be a new podcast. We're going to continue the conversation. It's just like, if you think about your favorite shows, and I think TV shows are different today, but do you remember like way back when, or maybe you do have some shows that still do this, where one season, all of the opening credits, and they show all the different characters and everybody's doing like whatever they're doing. And it's like that for that, it's that whole, I guess, little film for that season. But then the next season, they have a whole new thing for the opening credits. I don't know what that's called, but hopefully you know what I mean. I feel like that's really what we're doing here. Is we've had intentional documentary for the first couple years, and then now we are stepping into another season. So yeah. So while this is on a break, is working on some creative projects that I think that if I take time to work on these, they're ultimately going to allow me to serve you better with this whole like bigger conversation that we're having. So the first thing is the Tiny Story Society. You might remember I opened it up at the end of December. I've had 20 beautiful men and women join me in this thing, and I want to make sure that I'm giving them my best time. I'm not rushing through it. And then also, you might have heard me tease out in the past about the Playbook, which is a physical workbook that I have been working on for personal story management. So you're probably like, I don't even know what personal story management is. If I would even want something like that, what is it? So it's not memory keeping. It's not about documenting. It's a whole other thing that we will get there. And I know you'll love it. The people who have used my old playbook have loved it. The people who have printed it out and actually used it, they talk about how powerful the thinking that they did has been. And I have seen just the best stories that they have lived out, played out in their life since using the playbook. So over the summer, I had been expanding it. And I recently, in December, had it edited, and now I'm moving into new phases with it. And I'm just so eager to get it into the hands of you, of my audience. So I want to work on those two things among a few other things for a little bit. So while I'm doing all of that and while this podcast is on a break, I hope that you go back to the beginning of the podcast. I hope that you review some of the older episodes, because even if you look at it and you're like, oh yeah, I remember that episode, I liked it, or I didn't like it, or whatever, I hope you realize that you're in a new place in your life, or I shouldn't say new, but a different place in your life than you were 2 years ago, or 18 months ago, or even 3 months ago. So I hope that you go back and enjoy some of our older episodes. And I also hope to hear from you. I've opened up the Dangerously Good Stories Instagram, and it's just that, Dangerously Good Stories. You can also email me, marie@dangerouslygoodstories.com. I'd love to hear what stories you're working on this year in 2020. Are you working on documenting? Are you working on personal development? Are you looking at the stories of your childhood, or maybe your parents' stories, or your husband's or wives' stories? Like, whatever it is, where are you paying extra attention to in your life this year, and how are you responding? I want to hear about all of it, and I want to hear any requests you have for this podcast in the future, because it's for you as much as it is for me. I love recording this thing. Ultimately, it's got to have a purpose, right? And that purpose is to serve my listeners. So I really want to hear from you on all of that. So that's a wrap. That's all from me for now. Notice on, respond well, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you again for listening.